Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Covenant Cast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Steven.
I'm Jonathan.
And today, we're talking about teaching games. All right, well, if you are unaware, at the end of each of these podcasts, we answer questions from the audience. You can use the hashtag AskCovenant on Twitter or YouTube or Facebook, and we'll answer your questions right here on the show. We also ask a question during that phase that you guys are awesome enough to answer, and we started reading some of those comments in the intro section of this podcast.
Side.
So I'm going to pass it off to you, John. You're going to read said comment.
All right.
And tell us a little bit about your week.
Read a comment, tell about the week. I like it. All right, so this is by our friend BattleMind. He says, great cast, guys. Love it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't play in tournaments because they're not really that much fun for me. Games seem rushed, elbow-to-elbow seating, and too many games in one day make tourneys seem like a chore. Add 3 to 4 hours of round-trip driving, and no thanks. So I agree with this to some extent. The elbow-to-elbow stuff is rough. Like, I think I've said on this podcast before, I really like losing the first 2 rounds, and then you get with like the people who also have lost the first 2 rounds, and then you can play, because I've been in games where I feel rushed, or where I know it's apparent to me that I'm wasting somebody else's time. Like, they know what to do, and I'm just like, do. And I hate that. I hate that sort of discrepancy. I'm a sit back and play guy. So I like tournaments as sort of like a matchmaking thing, but past that, I really don't have a big desire to participate. So I completely agree here. And then if you have the round trip thing, it's a whole new deal.
I feel like, though, a lot of what we've talked about in the past, right, like tournaments and tabletop and prizes and tabletop and all these kind of things, besides the fact that technically, like, it doesn't have to be elbow to elbow.
Yes.
If it's done
in fact,
correctly.
Worth noting, the L5R games at Worlds, they had like a big space
ton
to
of
play.
space.
It's really cool.
But I would be very interested in, we talked about even tournaments like for L5R that don't have cuts and they're not as long. And so, like, I think there are a lot of people like BattleMind who would show up to basically gatherings to play games. And right now, tournaments aren't doing a great job at it. They're doing a decent job at it, but not doing the best job at pairing people of similar skill levels or making it not a 12-hour slog.
And there are definitely podcasts that we've done where we talk about this more. But I think it is certainly doing something right, but I don't think it's emphasizing the thing that most people want. Right. Now, some people are. And
I mean, a tournament's trying to shove as many rounds in as possible to determine the best player.
Yeah.
Which most of us are not actually that interested in becoming or knowing who the best player is.
Yeah.
It's more about just playing, experiencing the game.
And gathering around the game.
Yeah. Well, speaking about experience, you like that segue?
Yeah, there it is.
So I plumbed.
I like your art, by the
I
way.
plumbed this week.
To plumb.
To plumb. To blade.
You know, like plums?
No, like plums. Like I did it. I actually did it.
You plumbed.
I
You're
put together
plumber.
pipes. I glued them together with the pipe cement. I put them in the filters. I did everything. It was great. It was so rewarding.
So now you have a working system.
I have a working system. Yeah, 2 filters and a
Well
UV
water,
light.
no less.
Well water, yeah. Coming out of the well, it goes up. Like, I had the diagram drawn out. Oh man, it's like building blocks, Tinker Toys, the whole thing. Except for it's a lot more permanent because you're actually gluing the stuff. However, if there's anyone out there who's thinking about doing their own plumbing, I highly recommend. It's a little more expensive, but there's these things called shark bites, and they're just plug and play. You just put them in there, and if you mess up, you can take them out.
Is that what you did?
And that's what I did for my copper pipes. I had some PVC, some copper. And they make it very, very easy because they're very, very forgiving. But it's a lot of fun.
Easy to learn.
It's just like Legos, except for then after you do all that, you get potable water.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
So
Or if you build it poorly, you potentially die.
yeah.
So,
So it's
there's
like a
more
little more
high risk.
high risk, high reward version of building like a deck or squad.
Yeah,
Where it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
you build a machine, it works, cool, you win a tournament. It doesn't work, you have fun anyway.
Yeah.
In this case, you might just die.
Yeah, in this case,
Or
you might
catch
just die.
some kind
But
of
yeah,
awful
like I
thing.
turned on the water, the whole thing. There was a little bit of a leak. I was able to diagnose and fix the leak.
That's really
it's just
impressive.
like I love gaining that knowledge.
Did you
Like,
get it tested?
I love it. It's at the lab right now. I should learn today actually whether or not it's got the coliform in it
Through
anymore
my
or
wrist.
not. It shouldn't. The UV light should take care of that. But I just got to say it was great. Like,
That's
if you
cool.
can learn a new skill, YouTube is there to teach you everything that you need to know, and it was very nice. On top of that, I don't have any internet still, and last night
Living the rough life.
yeah, last night it was like super nice outside. There was a storm coming in, so I opened some windows. There was a little bit of breeze going through my house, and just read. And it was lovely. I was like tranced out by the end of it because there was no sound. I mean, it was just nothing. And then just reading, and it was really, truly wonderful.
Maybe we've gone too far. You know, has technology taken us to new places that aren't necessarily better places?
Well, I don't know if it's too far. I just think it's one of those things that sometimes, in fact, pretty much for the entirety of human history, technology outpaces philosophy. And I think now, after the big internet boom, we're starting to realize that there is a limit to how much we can consume. I mean, just like sugar, just like fats, just like everything, you need to have moderation in your life. There's somebody that said that.
Yeah, there's actually, speaking of reading, I've been reading this slogfest of a book about the whole digital revolution.
Yeah.
But there's two primary schools of thought in terms of technology that are happening. One is basically technology as a tool that is to enhance and be used alongside with humans. So there's like the hard, crunchy kind of decisions that the computer can do way more efficiently than like what we couldn't do without a spreadsheet. The other school of thought is the replacement of humans, where it's like technology building to a point where like it's replacing you.
Yeah, the post-labor society kind of a thing.
And so part of it to me is like in the like, we just tried to do everything we could with technology, and so much of it, and it's like everything about our lives is tech-based, and then you just stop for a second, and then you're human again.
Yeah.
And it's like,
yeah,
that's nice.
I mean, we can get real philosophical on it, because I've thought about why it is so appealing, because to me it's especially appealing, and this fits into why board games...
Being a human, or...?
Well, being a human.
Yeah.
Doing human things outside of electronics.
Like something a robot would say.
I love being a human. Let me tell you my top 5 favorite human qualities.
But I'll have all of the bananas.
My current thing, like I said, I've been thinking about this. This is unrefined, so
it's raw.
Yeah, it's
first
raw.
cut here.
Well, not first cut, but it's this is not the answer. But I think there may be something to the fact that everything digital has a refresh rate. So like your LED lights, they flicker, right? Your stuff, they flicker. Your computer screens flicker, and there is a gap in those flickers. And even if it's undetectable by human eyes, I think there's something that doesn't feel right to us. Whereas if you have a board game, if you have a book, if you have something like that, it is infinite, right? There's no gap between the way that, just like an analog recording versus a digital
This piece of
recording.
paper isn't blinking at me.
Right, it's not blinking at me, yeah. And same with records, right? You have a very smooth curve.
That's a Matrix question right there. We can't go down that route.
So I think there is something to that. I still don't know what it is, but I like it. There's something very fulfilling. Again, this is why board games are so great. There's something very fulfilling about stepping outside of this sort of manufactured light world that we more or less exist in all the time, and really dealing with something that's infinite, that has no breaks.
That's real interesting, man. That's real interesting. So I'm gonna go ahead and segue into my answer here. Billy Felon in the same topic.
Billy's always around.
We asked.
We was reading Billy's stuff.
These two in particular are in response to why or why not people play in tournaments. So Billy says, I play in tournaments because I think it's a great way to meet people, experience the community, and learn how to become a better player. I consider myself a competitive player, and I like testing myself and my deck construction against those in my area and beyond, and see how I stack up against others who love the same games that I do. Tournaments are also a great bonding experience, I found, both with the people you ride with and the people you meet at the tournament. For example, I got to meet and chat with Zach. That's me. At the Nova Open, and we never would have met or gotten to talk about Destiny had it not been for a tournament. And
That's a great counter.
I'm totally on board with this. Since we were young, I've loved traveling to tournaments with people. The car rides are always fun. You get to talk and you're excited. You get to meet new people that you're playing against. Everyone there is usually of a shared interest, and that immediately creates a connection that you don't have in like you randomly run into someone at a coffee shop versus run into someone at a Destiny tournament. Is a little bit different of experience. Then you get to play the game together and whatnot, and then check in with your friends in between rounds, and then drive home and talk about all your exciting experiences. And there's always, for me, like even Nova, which was definitely not my best performance, but I had a really great time, and I got to talk to a lot of people like Billy, and I'm not from that area, so I was meeting all kinds of new people, and left with a really, not really having won much of anything. Still had a great time, and met a lot of wonderful people, and had a blast.
That's something that I've been kind of refining in my own understanding of why I feel a certain kind of about cash prizes. Is that, and it's not about competition being the issue. I think that's kind of Billy hit it off for me there. Is that it's about competing on a battleground of ideas, which should be fulfilling enough in its own or by itself, right? So like if I go to a tournament, I'm a competitive person and I'm competing because I want to basically prove that my ideas are stronger or that my play is stronger than somebody else's, and I win the tournament having and that's the demonstration of that quality in my own approach to the game. Like that's great. I feel like that is literally why I go to tournaments and events, because I'm not looking
100%
for
why you go.
the big thing. I'm just like, how am I stacking up, and can I even like stack up well with some things that are unknown or maybe less interesting to a lot of people. But when it becomes not about testing your mettle and more about claiming the prize, then I think that's when it turns for me.
Yeah.
That my reward, my fulfillment is not of itself. Like it's not just of being better at something and having proved myself.
Sure.
It's about literally walking home with $1,000. And that does change things.
Well, I think that's the thing about tournaments, and we've talked a lot about tournaments here on the cast, is why you're at the tournament is significant for your appreciation of the tournament, how you're going to be involved and act at the tournament, the general culture at the tournament, right? Like why everyone is there, it matters.
It does matter.
And if they're there because they want to collect a cash prize, I think that does develop, and not that it's necessarily a bad culture, but it is very different than people that are literally just there for the community or to test their ideas or to see where they stack up.
What a different kind of environment that creates when you're testing your hypothesis, which is basically what it is. This is the testing ground where I take my ideas, whether it's about my own play style or about the deck that I built, and change it to this is where I make a living or where I get money. It kind of breeds out innovation, really, because you're less willing to take a chance, because it's not about taking a chance and proving yourself and your own ideas right. It's about getting the money.
I mean, I think about this actually quite often with how much we actually do this in various pursuits in our lives that are not driven by prizes or like rewards. Like I even think about when we were kids and we might get together and play Smash Brothers or GoldenEye, or Halo, and it had nothing to do with the end game. Like nobody won anything, but the pride that you felt being number one on the leaderboard or having, made that play that won your team the game was enough.
And the reality of the enjoyment I had from playing GoldenEye with you two, or the pod racing game. It's like
pod racing.
Yeah, see, there it is.
Greatest thing.
That's why I was there. It's like, I would love to beat you and be mouthy and walk away. You guys know I'm better at pod racing than you. But like, even if that doesn't happen, it's like I knew I was going to enjoy playing regardless, or Mario Kart or any of these games.
Imagine you take our Halo sessions from long ago and it's like, all right, at the end of the night, someone's going to get $600. Like, how different would that vibe have been?
I think a really good example, you take Road Redemption, which, by the way, if anyone is on Steam, get it. It's amazing. It's a spiritual successor to Road Rash. But
we played so much Road Rash.
We played so much Road Rash. So think about it this way. If there's, let's say, $100 on the line, and you're playing Road Redemption, and all of a sudden, to the right, you see a shortcut that you don't know if it's going to work out for you or not. Do you take that shortcut knowing there's a higher risk but a higher reward, or do you go the safe path?
Well,
I'd probably go the safe path.
My grand question is your enjoyment of playing that, like the pressure of taking that decision or not, right? Is that affecting your actual enjoyment of just playing the game?
Right.
Because
for me, it definitely, because like in Road Redemption, sometimes like I'll hit the jump jets at the wrong time and end up halfway across nowhere.
And now there's like serious frustration.
And now it's like, I've just lost the race.
I've just lost the money.
But now like it's like, well, I'm behind. Yeah. I'm gonna like just keep doing weird stuff because I'm not, I'm probably not gonna win. But it doesn't matter.
It's like what's that race game that we play on the Air console?
Oh yeah, Racing Wars.
Racing
Wars.
Yeah, Racing Wars.
I'll tell you what, I don't need to win a single time, but knocking you guys off the map is the funniest thing.
That's enough, right?
Right. But like if there was a big prize on the line, I'd play that game a little bit differently. I'd play it a little differently.
And I wonder, the only argument I think that you can make is to say that because tabletop games, the expandable ones, require an investment, monetary investment over time, that it is justified to pay that back out just to kind of recoup what you've spent. But I'm not sure that holds water.
Well, and I think the thing for me is there can be competitive tournaments, there can be cash prize tournaments, and I don't think those are inherently bad. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of people like Billy and like me who show up to Nova and like winning is great. But like there's a lot of things that can be incentivized and be the focus of a gathering or a tournament that don't have to be the prizes. And I'm not sure. I think people would enjoy it as much, if not more. And there's a bunch of people that maybe aren't enjoying it, like BattleMind, because of the over focus. And so if the reality is we want to get a bunch of people involved and have a really growing, big, welcoming community, pushing
shift.
further into cash prizes probably isn't going to get it done. So to segue to that, my week, Thanksgiving was great. The comments last week on Thanksgiving on the episode, also great. Appreciate all the comments.
Yeah.
And I went to Chicago. I love that city.
Good.
And I won't ever talk about Frank Thomas again.
Food.
For the longtime listeners.
You kind of got eviscerated.
Yeah, I got destroyed.
Yeah.
So that was it. You just drove up there, and this
it was great.
Your new
This is
fiance's family.
post-engagement, yes.
Yeah, it was her family.
Puerto Rican food.
She has a very large Puerto Rican family who is awesome, and they're like super fun. I have a big family too, but they're
less
just,
Puerto Rican.
They're less high energy and less. I mean,
They're Midwestern.
other thing is
Less
their
hip
love
music,
language
for
is
sure.
food. So one, there's a lot of it. Two, if you don't eat it, then you're basically saying, I don't love you. So you eat.
Nice.
I'll tell you that. So I had a great time and excited to be back. A lot of cool stuff going on.
Excellent.
Cool.
Well, I'll finish it off here with Tyler Delaney in response to your question. The number one reason some games don't make it to the table anymore is the complexity of the rules. Having to reread the rules before, or even worse, during a game night is an instant deal breaker. These days, my gaming group favors accessibility over deep strategy. I have found that to be somewhat similar in my own experience as well, especially as I'm trying to expand my world into other people's worlds who are not familiar with tabletop games. You start to realize how big of a barrier so many of these rule sets actually are. And I am, to speak to that too, like I went to Lindsay this weekend to see Shannon's family. And we sat down on the first night and played Sequence. Game.
Classic
played
game.
Sequence?
Oh, yeah.
So, Jonathan, it's essentially you have two decks shuffled together.
Or playing cards.
And then you have a big mat that has all the different cards on it. And then whenever you play a card, you put a chip on that place on the board.
Of your team color.
And then you're trying to get 5 in a row.
Okay.
And then so somebody else can come through and put one in your way. And then there are jokers or jacks that can remove chips or can be wild cards so you can surprise people. But you're playing with a partner. So like I play the 8 of hearts, which is here, and then they might play the 6 of clubs, which is here. And so we're starting to chain it together, and we don't know what cards each other has. So it's kind of like that pitch feel, right? But it's just so little on the line and enough randomness and just kind of like, you can make the best play in a series of bad, options, like those kinds of things. But the reason that game is successful, like we were playing with her grandma, and it took her like a couple of rounds, but she picked it up eventually, right? Like after a couple of rounds, she had not played it before and she picked it up.
Nice.
Now, could she do that with, even a Ticket to Ride style game? It's like, no, maybe probably not. Going any deeper than that, like grandma's not at the table, is what I mean, right? And so the complexity of the rules really do limit who can actually be involved and how soon it takes before they actually feel comfortable and are enjoying themselves.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a big deal. I mean,
it is a big deal.
That's why Love Letter is a constant include for you.
And I think there's something just like, hopefully we'll get into this, but just like as you're teaching a game, you build it up from its simplest form to its most complex form. I think just the language of board games has to be built up from its simplest form because its most complex form. You don't want to start off with a Love Letter or even an Arkham Horror. You don't want to start. You can start off with Love Letter all day long.
I was like, wait, why would you not start with Love Letter?
You don't want to start off with like an Arkham Horror until they've got Love Letter, right? Until they understand, you put cards on the table or like, how you tap cards and all this stuff. There's a certain you can get more advanced, but you don't want to start off super advanced.
And then just to cap off the week here, a couple of things.
I was going to say, I'm about to segue hard into this.
I watched the Murder on the Orient Express, the new one with Johnny Depp and all of that.
John Depp's.
It's on my list.
Yeah. So
it's got medium reviews.
It's in the classic whodunit style.
Yeah.
Right?
The old British.
Classic, bunch of people in one location. Somebody's pulled the trigger, and your suspicions should be constantly moving from one person to another to another.
Should be,
should be. The way that it's framed is actually it's not too slow. It's that by the time everybody has a reason for their own guilt, like everybody is on the table as a suspect, you kind of start wrapping it up at that moment. Like there's an event that happens right at that moment where it's like, okay, and now we're into the conclusion. But I feel like a really good whodunit story is you establish why everybody could be guilty, and then you play with that for a while. Like you catch this person in the kitchen. What are you doing? Oh, I was just washing my hands.
Yeah.
Like the movie Clue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 20-minute
Have you seen
movie.
that movie? 20 minutes.
You can finish that.
No,
in
really,
6
that
times
movie.
speed.
Have you seen that movie?
I haven't seen it.
It's
actually.
a classic,
I heard
like
it's very good,
where
yeah.
it's actually a great movie. I think it's good.
Yeah.
But you need to establish
I'm
like
sad to hear that.
everybody is suspicious.
there's a lot of
and then they
actors
need
I
to
like
be
in that
doing
movie.
suspicious things
Yes.
that make you be like, this is the moment. But
Yeah.
then it's like, oh no, it's actually they were just being weird.
Well, and a lot of times the whodunit will be like, you suspect this person, they're doing something fishy, but then like it moves you along to the next character, and you keep hitting like, oh, it's this person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's by the time I got to the last person, it was it was starting to wrap up, and it's like, well, I wanted them all to be established and then messing around. But it's well shot. It's not a vulgar movie, which is hard to find these days. There's no cursing or anything in it really that I remember. It's just like it's super clean. So just a nice classic movie.
Just a movie, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, probably the original, the OG is probably better. The book's certainly probably better, but I haven't seen or read either of those, so I can't speak to that.
Interesting.
And then I'm like 50 pages away from finishing Hamilton.
Oh man, you're almost there.
doing
He's
it,
going to
man.
be unleashed.
Going for the 365 plan.
Yeah, 365. I think it's
One
been
page
about
a
a
day.
year. It's been about a year. No, 1 page a day would have you finish it in about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So that's not quite enough. And then also, Alan Watts, man, I hope that you had mentioned it. You've been reading The Way of Zen, which is awesome.
I planned on mentioning it when I got close to finishing it.
Well,
not this episode.
I'll hit you on some Watts. But anyway, I had been just very taken by Watts in college, and I don't know if you guys have these kind of conversations or evaluations of your own self, but I feel like my approach to life was I liked it more back then. And I, you can talk a lot about external circumstances, the fact that there was very little responsibility, giant group of friends / people available, spontaneous living, possibilities,
College
excitement, college life, right? But I also just think that my psychology and my way of conducting myself at the time was more just ultimately productive or positive. And I was wondering why, so I've been thinking about it a lot. And I was steeped in the Eastern Phil at the time, and I was reading a lot of Watts. And so I just looked up, like on the way to Lindsay, I looked up Alan Watts quotes just to see if anything would kind of re-spark, kind of get me in a different frame of mind. And the first one absolutely did. And I will read it for you here. Man suffers only because he takes seriously what the gods made for fun. That's very Watts. Like that's the ultimate kind of universal philosophy that Watts was pitching. But really taking that to heart, it's just kind of a deep exhale for anything that you're holding on to. Where it's like, why are you taking all of these, even the smallest things, so seriously? Why are you worried about this? Or are you thinking about this? Or does this decision really have the impact that you're allowing it to have? And so it was really nice. I feel like it was kind of like the weights came off.
That's awesome.
And so I just have it in my phone and I'm looking at it anytime I'm there.
Feeling a little too much weight.
Yeah, so I think it's nice.
That's cool.
And I think reading, the reason that I was a certain way then was I was reading this kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think my mind and my persona is naturally driven to be very analytical and and so having that counterweight and that counterbalance constantly may be necessary just for me to really enjoy modern life.
Yeah.
So I'm doing it. I'm counterbalancing it hard.
Man, I would love to go down that road.
We'll check back in on that one.
All right.
Anyone, sorry to cut you off. Anyone at home that is interested in Watts, he has a YouTube video. There's a YouTube video.
The old dancing one?
With the dancing, yes. Alan Watts
classic,
dancing or dance, you should find it, and that'll kind of give you an overview of who he is. But it's worth listening to and worth
He actually was
ingesting.
divorced multiple times and was an alcoholic. So...
Whoa,
I think I
that just got real.
Put that in there.
All right, well, segue into, you're talking about the complexity of games earlier, and we're talking about teaching games here. So I want to kick it off and ask you both, what, in your minds, makes a game teachable? Like, what makes a game particularly teachable, right?
Particularly teachable?
So, like, is it purely just simplicity, lack of complexity?
Yes.
I think it can be complex, but I think the internal logic has to has to be strong. So the way that something is expected to work by the prospective player needs to work the way that it's expected.
Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah, it needs to be intuitive. So like if, for instance with Destiny, if there are dice on a character, and I expect that whenever I activate that character, I'm probably going to roll all of those dice. It wouldn't make sense if the rule said pick one, like that kind of stuff. Yeah. And that's a bad example, but it's basically like X-Wing is a good example, right? If you see these little ships on the board, and then for whatever reason the movement is not good, or it's like you can't move them in certain ways, or you have to roll a die or something. It's like I expect that I can take maneuvers with these ships, and as long as that holds and makes sense, if I see that on the 4 template there's a little turny thing, and I think, okay, well that means I turn my ship around, and yet it doesn't mean that, then that's where problems
Or even
start,
maybe a little higher level concept would be if Darth Vader's on the table, you expect him to be able to hurt someone.
Yeah, truly.
Sure.
It's like if he's not in the game intuitively, threatening opponents or something,
it should be scary.
Then it's like, well, this doesn't
powerful.
Make any sense.
Yeah,
kind of a situation.
You get in those situations where like you'll have a new player that will have. I watched a hilarious Battlefront thing. That game is just getting hammered, but
I played Battlefront, by the way. That's not what this episode's about.
The old one.
Oh, okay.
Where like if you have Vader and you have 3 rebel troopers in front of you, you don't need to know how the rules work to know that if you can get there, you should be able to dispatch with him.
Yeah.
But if that doesn't happen, if you get there and then you just die because they shot you or something, it doesn't feel right. And so that becomes a very difficult moment in a game whenever it's just like, that didn't make sense. I didn't like that.
I would say like a very, very clear objective and also very clear ways to get to the objective. So if in Swords and Strongholds, your objective is to either get rid of all the mice or to build the one stronghold at the end of the board. And it's like, if I can explain to somebody how everything, or actually Netrunner is a really good example. If I can explain to somebody, your job is to get 6, agenda points, 7 agenda points?
7
agenda points. This is how you do it. You do, this action, and you're running because you're getting agenda points. And you're making a server because you're about to get agenda points. Like everything, if you can relate everything back to a very clear objective, I think that's very, very important. I was actually, whenever I was preparing for this podcast, I was reading or watching a bunch of videos about scaffold learning.
You're obsessed with scaffolding learning.
I'm obsessed with it. There's one from Alberta Education, which is just a teacher talking about it. But they said something that I thought was really right. And everything that I'm going to do comes back to this. Learning always proceeds from the known to the new. So if the first thing you do is say, this is how you win the game. Okay, known. I win the game by doing X. And then you say, you can get to X by doing Y. And it's like, okay. And it's like, you can get to X also by doing Z. And it's like, okay. Now I know. I've gone from the known to the new, and you can build that scaffold up very easily. Now there are some games, and they get complex, and that's fun, but you need to build that, like I was saying earlier, that base understanding of what a board game is and can do before you really start introducing the exceptions.
Well, and I think a really practical example of a scaffolding learning situation is like with a video game. I recently did play Battlefront, Battlefront 2, after all the noise going on with that game.
The new one? The fancy one?
The new fancy one.
The one with all the loot crates and the nonsense, the microtransactions.
It's like sort of like Net Neutrality. I don't really want to get into it.
Yeah.
Inside joke. But effectively, the scaffolding example here is that you start the game, right? And you're this a Star Wars character, and you're the leader of this squad of stormtroopers.
Right.
It's like elite squad, and you're on Endor when the Death Star 2 is getting blown up. So as a Star Wars fan, this is very easy. But you start, and it's like, hey, you don't have any gear or weapons, right? Here's how you move your person around. Here's how you interact with certain things.
Yeah.
And then it's like, all right, now you can. Here's a pick up a gun. So you pick it up, and it's like, well, this is how you pick up weapons.
Yeah.
And oh, now you're going to shoot it.
Yeah.
And then it's like, later you find some grenades. It's like, well, here's how you equip grenades, here's how you throw. And so most video games naturally do scaffolding learning, which is, when you're getting into a video game, right, I'm going to play a game,
right,
and I'm going to be in control of a thing. And so that's kind of a known. And then they just slowly introduce. So by the end of Battlefront, even the campaign mode, you've learned so many things.
And you learned by doing.
Here's how you jump across a thing. Here's how and you've learned all these complex things. But a lot of times when it comes to tabletop games, that kind of a system isn't exactly built in.
Yeah, this is the number one thing, and the book Super Better really goes into this. But the number one thing that digital games have above tabletop games and can really trace their success back to is the ability to build in this scaffold learning into the system. They have tutorial levels, and by and large, tabletop games don't have tutorial levels. So if you're teaching a game, step one is kind of up to you to figure that out.
To build the tutorial level?
If you're curious about scaffold learning, let me throw 2 videos out to you. If you type in scaffold learning and Super Meat Boy, or just Meat Boy, you'll get his interview, and it's so good.
It's really good.
And then there's another one, this is more crass, so NSFW, but if you type in scaffold learning and Mega Man, you'll get a video, and it goes through, like, basically you set up challenges where the only answer is to do a thing that you didn't know you could do until you experiment long enough.
Yeah,
and I think that's really cool.
Is that the difference really between old video games and new ones? Because we often talk about the hand-holding aspect of modern video games, and how a lot of people say, that's not, like, back in our day, we had to just figure it out and play this level 20 times until we got it. But can there be too much hand-holding through that process?
Yes.
And why? Like, why is that bad?
At some point, you have to set someone free, right? It's like you've taught them how to do certain things.
Certainly, but
actually, more importantly,
for instance, in Mario, right? Nobody ever told me how to sprint in Mario.
No. But that first level is designed to make you have to sprint to survive it.
But would it have been bad if it had said hold down B to sprint?
Yes, because the studies say that you are much more likely to, 1, feel that dopamine reward when you figure it out yourself, and 2, much more likely to remember that forever.
I love that.
If
I do remember how to run in Mario.
Right, yeah, if you do it, then it's much more powerful.
You never let go of B these days. You just never let it go.
So, we've seen in some tabletop games, I remember Doomtown first had a very good example of a set the board up like this, follow these steps, and by the end of it, because the thing about Doomtown is it needed it, right?
Well, the thing about Doomtown is it's impossible to learn. That's the one, the game was phenomenal, except for the fact that you couldn't learn how to play it.
It actually, this goes back to the very first point you made on this podcast, which is when something is on the board, it should do what you expect it to do.
Right.
And if I have a cowboy on the board, I'm not expecting him to buy land. I'm confused. I'm confused by it.
I get it. So, a lot of games, though, don't come with that, right?
Right.
They might have, like, the rules, and the rules might be 15, 20 pages long, and all these kind of things. But we're talking about teaching games, so kind of the thing we're building to here that I think all of us are taking somewhat for granted is, like, when you're teaching someone how to play a game, I think even the perspective of looking at it like you were taking them through the introductory levels of a video game is very helpful for people familiar with video games.
Yes.
So in that regard, right, like you sit down to teach someone a game, and we all have our own ways. We've all worked in the store. We've all demoed games for years. We've all taught people games for years. What are the natural steps that you tend to follow when you are teaching a new game to somebody?
Yeah.
We have a great example of this with the learning series that are going on right now with Netrunner and L5R, and presumably more to come. And you get a sense for, with the Netrunner and specifically, like, I think it's no secret that I'm probably the biggest Netrunner fan / player here. So the setup of that was kind of how I've always taught Netrunner, which is the first thing that you need to know is how do you win the game?
Yep.
Agendas.
Objectives,
right?
That's my number one rule.
We don't even have stuff on the board yet.
Yeah.
It's like, here's what the card looks like, and this is what you want to
go
get.
Find this.
Go find this.
That gives you so much context. Because if you don't understand that that's what you're trying to get, nothing else in the game makes any sense at all.
And then in that same moment, and maybe even a little bit before it, it's why is this game, like, flavor-wise, what is it trying to emulate? How am I supposed to feel when I'm playing this? It's like, it's a sci-fi universe, the corporation has these secrets and dirty laundry, and you as the runner are basically trying to discover these secrets. You connect it to Enron, you connect it to, like, modern examples of how this matters. And so you've set up the stage where it's like, here's the world that we're going to play in together, and here's the game that we're basically playing. And then it's like, okay, go steal an agenda. Boom, you just did it. You did it. And then it's like, well, that's too easy. And then it's like, well, you're right, because the corp is going to do this to stop you from doing that. And then it's like, well, now I can't get in the server.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's why you're going to do this.
Yep, exactly.
And then you install the icebreaker.
You put up a problem, they find a solution.
And after that, you've taught it.
Yeah.
Like, that is literally the game of Netrunner right there. Those concepts are done. And then I think the example of the learning series does a great job too, in that you teach the smallest amount of fundamentals and basics that are necessary to understand kind of the language of the game and what is going on when people are doing stuff. And then you immediately show them the game in action.
Yes.
And there's going to be questions that come up, and there's going to be confusion as it goes along, but you just get them into it before they get kind of bored of all the stuff they're trying to ingest, right?
Well, there's actually, I was reading on Our Board Games, a thing from 2014 about how to teach games, and there was one particular thing that came up that I thought was very interesting, and that is let them get hands-on. So as you're explaining, or as you're setting up, let them help you set. Let them shuffle that deck of cards. Like, just, we learned about this in the store, that just people having their hands on something they're much more likely to connect with that. I think that's a really cool idea that I didn't know before. That could be like really worthwhile. The other thing is, once you get into that game, there's three things to really remember. And number one is, if someone loses due to incompetence, they are like 0% chance going to pick it up again. If someone wins and still feels incompetent, they may give it another shot, right? Like that's your kind of best bet. But really, if you can dispel this feeling of incompetence, I don't know what I'm doing, yet I won or yet I lost, that is what you need to be doing. So your job, number one, is not to win when you're playing somebody.
For the love of everything.
And people do this.
I
do
know.
is I'm just like, ho, they'll think this is a really cool move, and they don't. Like,
They don't.
I may have told this story
They
before,
don't.
but we were teaching our dad
You're
Mutant
not
League
clever.
football.
You're not clever.
And I was like, oh, I'm going to show him this, like, cool, I'm going to, like, do this thing where I shoot over the line with this mutant superpower that I have on the video game. And I did it, and he just, like, put the controller down and walked off. Because, like, that wasn't even in his realm of possibility.
I want to foil that a little bit by saying it has to be balanced, in my opinion, against also not telling them what to do.
Right.
So
now,
strongly.
Here's how I get around that.
Yeah.
Is that what I do whenever I'm teaching a game is I look at the board and I tell people what they are seeing. Not what they should do, but it's like a lot of times, especially if you're starting out and you want that quick win, you will not say something so that you can do this. Oh, you didn't look over here. And it's like, that's awful. That's really bad. Like, back when I was teaching my friend Josh Monsterpocalypse, I was like, okay, so I'm looking at it. This guy over here might be able to come in and get me. So I'm thinking about guarding over here. You can explain your turn without being pedantic also. But also when it's their turn, I would say, like, this guy over here has these abilities. Like, if you do this, he will be able to counter that. If you do X or Y or Z, like, this is the public information that anyone who has a basic understanding of this game knows, and go.
Yeah, and it's a very fine line to toe, because at the same time, right, if someone, like, you're playing Netrunner as an example, or I'll use my favorite example, Destiny, or X-Wing. We'll go back to X-Wing. Let's loop it all around. X-Wing, a lot of times it'll be like, hey, they'll be making a move that's bad.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, it's very easy to want to say, no, you should do a 4 forward, and then you should barrel roll, and you should use this thing to do this thing, and this, and this. And it's like, that's also no fun.
Yeah.
Because it's like in a video game, if you're just watching someone play,
Yeah.
it's nowhere near as fun as if you just get to be Mario in the game.
Right.
And so, but you also don't want the situation, like you're saying, of they lost because of
They didn't know it was.
just don't know.
They're like, oops, I didn't see that over there. This is my
Or
mistake.
it's
I've
like
lost.
if you're teaching Netrunner and they don't know that if they run and score an agenda, you could tag them and then kill them with Scorched Earth.
Yes.
It's like, that is a bad way to lose when you don't understand. But like, if they're about to run, it's like, hey, be aware. If you run and you're successful, this is something that could happen.
Yeah.
But it's hard.
And even like, I mean, if you can have the presence of mind to explain that before they take their turn, so whenever they're calculating their own strategy in their own head, that is something they're factoring in originally, instead of being like, I'm going to do this, and like, well, actually, you don't want to do the well actually. So that's kind of a bad situation. So you really want to just like put out, I mean, on Mario, for instance, you see the Goomba, you see the blocks. Right? That's a visual understanding. You have to do a lot more reading in tabletop. And if you can change that into a perception, like here's the Goomba, here are the blocks, get through it. People are and you can get into that scaffold learning thing a little bit that way.
Well, and kind of touching back on scaffold learning, another tool I really like to use when I'm teaching and X-Wing is a great example of this. I will actually scaffold in the rules, where from the first turn that we're taking, I'll actually like remove things.
Yeah.
Like I was teaching 2 people how to play X-Wing, and it was like I didn't even introduce pilot abilities. Like didn't ever even get to it because it's like, hey, first turn, there's not even attacks. It's like we're just gonna move. It's like I'm just gonna show you how to set your dials, how to decide which pilots are going, right? It's like second turn. Now I'm gonna add in actions.
Right.
We're still not attacking.
Yeah.
But it's like now you can just move and then take an action. Third turn, it's like now we're gonna add in actions, right? And then after actions, like now we're gonna add in your upgrades.
Yeah.
And like just slowly scaffolding it in.
Yeah.
I think is because again, the faster, it's sort of like in a video game, right? If you couldn't play until you knew all the things you needed to beat the last level, you would have 2 or 3 hours of learning how to play, which is no fun.
And you're missing out on some really fun stuff.
The thing to bring it back to Mario is that the number of times that you fell into the hole is massive.
Excessive,
right?
yes.
So instead of the game, if the game every time you press the jump button and it said, "Wait, you shouldn't jump right now, you'll fall in the hole," you would put it down.
Yeah.
Right?
But you can fall in the hole and restart.
You can fall in the hole and restart. So if somebody is doing something that is wildly wrong or inefficient, let them do it. Let it resolve,
100%.
see what happens, and then move forward. It's like, for me, like when I'm teaching Netrunner, it's like I want to run archives. It's like there's nothing. There's not even a face-down card in archives. You gain nothing from running archives. But it's like, okay, you access these cards, you see these, you already knew what they were, but here are the cards. Next action. And they can very quickly understand, like, I didn't really gain anything from that, did I?
And I think the exchange there is that, let's say they make the move, and I like that a lot. If they make the move in Netrunner, they score the agenda, they feel great, and then you murder them with Scorched. A lot of times in that scenario, I will murder them to show them, and then I'll say, all right, now we're going to go back to the moment before you made that decision. We're going to put everything back. What's your choice now? And it's just like where if you fall down the hole and you reset back to the reset point, it's like, all right, well, I got to do the level again. And then you get past that level, and you're eventually, like, they're going to learn. And because and I think it's, if you're learning a game, I'm always like, get in there, start playing, start making mistakes, because that's the fastest way to learn. But you also have to understand that, like, for a lot of people, making mistakes and failing is, like, maybe preventing them from wanting to go again. But in Mario, again, it's a great example of this because you never feel bad for falling down the hole. It's like, all right, well, start again. And you just go.
I knew how to jump, I just didn't know when and where, and that's fine. But that's expected. And like in terms of like the Scorched and stuff, there are issues. Again, there's this balance between the runner or the player understanding what is possible, and when it's right to introduce them to the next possibility. So if somebody has face checked a bunch of ice, and I chose not to res it just to let them get accesses and see what's going on, and then the next time it's like, okay, I res it. And it's like you just took 2 damage, and you realize that, oh, this can be a dangerous thing interacting with ice. I better be careful. And so then you move along and you do your thing, and then you're going and you face check another piece of ice, and it's like a really bad thing happens to you now, but not devastating.
But you knew that was a possibility.
But you knew it was possible.
I think that's a great line, because it's like if you take a move, right, and it's like not lethally harmful, I think that's fine to let them do to an extent, right?
Exactly.
Like you need to feel the pain of running into an ice. But again, if the goal is to get them basically scaffolded up to the point where they can play this game, it's not about just murdering them. And like there are times when I've been teaching where it's like, well, technically in X-Wing, right, like I should attack this ship. But instead I'm going to attack the other ship because I don't want to just destroy one of your ships on the first turn.
Like the number one thing to not do is, no, you shouldn't do that. You should do this instead. That's the number one way to be bad at this. At teaching games. So if you're doing that,
gotta
stop.
You kind of gotta flow with it. The other thing is, like especially in Swords and Strongholds, whenever I'm teaching it, sometimes you can turn in 3 cards and you get to res a mouse, right? But like that's kind of
that's a rule.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the more advanced maneuvers. So what I'll do is I'll actually wait until I see my opponent, the person I'm teaching, do it, and it's like once they do it, I know they've got a grasp on it. And then I can do it, right?
I had no idea that was a rule.
One of each type.
Surprises when you're teaching people are just never good. You just want to avoid it really at all costs. The other thing is that I think people kind of feel when you're trying to throw a game, I don't think a lot of people like it. Your mileage may vary. Some people do.
I was getting ready to go here next.
Go ahead.
I was just the reality of like how much where's the level of throwing or letting someone win?
Yeah.
For the two of you, but continue on.
Well, so what I do, and I think that you've talked about this before, but make what I call like a Glass Joe deck. So Glass Joe is the first villain you fight or opponent you fight in Super Punch-Out, and he's just a pushover, right? But he's a pushover because he's there to let you learn the rules. So if you're playing a deck building game, make a bad deck, make a bad and simple deck, so that you're not surprising them, and you can play hard, but they have the tools to counter you at every point.
Yeah, that is something I do in both Destiny and X-Wing, where I'll have decks built that are, one of the concepts in these games is tiers.
Yeah.
Tier 1 being the most powerful decks, Tier 2 and Tier 3 being less good decks, and so I'll usually have a Tier 3 deck, a couple Tier 2 decks, and then the rest of my decks that are somewhere between 2 and 1. And then if I'm playing against someone who knows how to play but is kind of newer, I'll have a Tier 2 deck.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm trying as hard as I can, because that's the hard part for me is, you run and it's like a lethal piece of ice. I don't want to res it yet, especially early.
Yeah.
But I also don't want, in Netrunner it's nice because it's hidden information, but I also don't want to teach you, I don't want you to think things I'm doing are right moves.
Right, because they're watching you. I guess that's a really good point about the throwing game. If they're watching you to figure out what to do and you do the wrong move on purpose, that's kind of counterproductive.
Yeah, but there's I guess lines there, like X-Wing I think is a good example of, you can make decisions that aren't inherently bad, but also prevent it from being like a bad experience for them.
Yeah.
So are there any other, are there any other concepts that are important to you when it comes to teaching of games?
The one question that I think we didn't exactly hit on is, do you always let them win their first one?
Yes.
And I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not that opposed to like throwing a game, as long as you do it. I think the vast majority of human problems just stem from a lack of communication, right?
Right.
So I will literally tell you, like, I am going to during this game, I am here to teach you this game.
Yes.
I'm not going to be competing at the highest level. I'm not going to be trying to like just destroy you with every trick that I know.
Yeah.
I'm literally here to teach you this game.
Yep.
And so I like to get it as close as possible. And then usually there's like, they have an 80 to 90% chance of doing the right thing, and they should know how to do it by the time. It's like I'm on 6 points, they're on 6. I install the agenda, and then it's like all the ISOs res, they know how many credits they need, they have the icebreakers they need, and get in or not. And if they don't, I'll score it and I'll win, right?
Yeah.
But putting it very close and giving them a really good percentage shot at winning that first game makes a lot of difference. And then maybe more importantly is, what's the dialogue after the game is over?
Yeah.
How do you follow up after having done, played that test game and played that learning game? There's a lot of different ways to take it after that.
That's true.
Right? The number one thing you don't want to do is like, now let's play on where I'm trying. I hate that.
That's awful.
So you immediately take any sense of satisfaction that person had and throw it out the window.
Well,
Complete waste of time.
And you're totally right. I think I'm not one for throwing the game, but mainly what you said, how you framed it, is make it as close as possible. And I actually like to give them multiple high odds chances to win. So that even if they lose, then the conversation can be, here's how close you were, right? And it's like, oh man, because a lot of times that'll make them want to try again.
I like to hear how close you were.
And then instead of it being, and if they win, they normally are fine playing again as well because they're excited. But either way that goes, it's like you were either super close, like you almost hit that agenda in my hand 3 times. Like you could have won easily.
Show them your hand.
So they want to try again, or they just win and then they're ready to play. And instead of it being like, now let's play one where I'm trying, it's super easy, especially if you did a good job teaching, to be like, it depends on the game and how long it took and how much time you've got, but like, you want to play again?
My immediate follow-up always, I won't say it always tends to be, it usually is, all right, that was great. Like you did a really good job of kind of picking up those concepts pretty quickly. What kind of questions did you have during the game? Like, were there any confusing points or anything that I did that didn't make sense, or that you were considering and then you talked yourself out of it? Like, what are the things that are the most confusing to you right now? And there's always a myriad of things. It's like, well, I don't understand why I would ever not just dig until I install all 3 icebreakers. Like, why would I ever just run
Conceptual
early?
questions.
Why would I ever face check ice? And then you can get into those deeper discussions about, well, The reality is that if you're not pressuring me on credits, I'm free to score points over here while you're trying to set up, and you'll never catch me in time. So you have to put that early pressure on to force me to res ice, or you have to put that early pressure on to get one of my characters down in Destiny. Those kinds of discussions then kind of stem naturally, and that's the kind of discussions that I think if you're going to be a tabletop game enthusiast, that's a huge part of the hobby, is conceptual talk with another person. And so you kind of, you almost scaffold learn into community discussion past the game itself, which is really one of the best parts of the entire hobby.
That's really cool. I have one question for both of you. At what point in teaching do you get into general strategy? Do you say when you hand them the deck, this is what the deck is supposed to do?
You should, to me, an introductory list or deck should never come with an explanation.
It should be
because
so straightforward.
It shouldn't. It should play straight up fundamentals for whatever it is, the basic game that you just taught. So like in X-Wing, if you say the number one thing you're trying to do is eliminate your enemy ships, that's how you win the game, all of those upgrades and everything should be pointed at destroying ships. None of this weird techie stuff. You talk about Destiny, it's all about damage. Don't introduce mill cards in that deck. Like, keep it out of there. Don't introduce shield cards in that deck. Just damage. Damage. You can always introduce that stuff later, but always have fundamental decks that are playing directly to the win condition that you're trying to teach.
Yeah, it's following that objective up every single time. I think that's really smart. What about you, Zach? When do you go into strategy of how to play? Like the general strategy of a deck or something?
I mean, it depends on the deck, but I like, especially early on, like in Destiny's example or X-Wing, you're playing with a starter, not even a full list. And I think it's part of the scaffolding where you want to start with the simplest, right? In Battlefront, you start without a gun.
Right, yeah.
And shooting things is like the game. So as simple as possible until they're ready. And that's what I do really like about X-Wing, because you can ignore the upgrades of the pilot abilities until they're ready for that. And depending on the feel and where they're at.
It's still fun to fly ships around. I look at it like
that's what makes X-Wing so good. It's always still just fun to fly ships around.
I always look at it like a sculpture, like a painting in Photoshop, where you're building up the layers. You do the one big sort of blob where you get sort of the outline, the silhouette of what you're trying to do, and then you slowly start building in those exceptions to the rules. But you never start with the exceptions. Always start with the rules straightforward. And if you can build a deck or build a tutorial level or set up a board in such a way where they are forced to really interact with those very fundamental pieces of the game and then win or get some sort of dopamine response for doing something good, then that's going to be the best that you can do. And the biggest thing that you can do to do that is to know the game. Inside and out, know the game. And because I've been down that road where I start teaching and they ask a question and I have to pull out the instruction manual.
Well, and that's part of the beauty of starting simple, is that you don't have to have all the rules. Like with X-Wing, the weird interactions, or with whatever the case may be, right? It's like, no, we have ships, dials, and maneuver templates. I was like, that's the start.
Pew pew.
Then we introduce attack dice and defense dice. And then it's like, then we introduce focus tokens. And then you just slowly scaffold them up.
Always going from the known to the new.
Known
to the new.
And this is honestly, I mean, to speak to the bigger picture of what we talk about a lot in terms of the landscape of the industry and how we might, change things and certainly amplify things, is that I think this is one area where a lot of like stores or gathering places are failing their communities, is not providing an easy way to learn the games that they're selling. Like that seems like 101 what needs to happen to get a community going is and I think that is the responsibility of the institution that's hosting these communities, is like you should have easy access to materials and everything it takes to learn the games that you want to build communities for. Like that's necessary, right?
I mean, I think we've all been in that situation, to kind of hit on the rulebook thing as well, and learning is that like when you go to play a game and you're just watching someone read the rulebook for 20 minutes or an hour, that's no fun.
Or you feel like they may be telling you the wrong set of rules. Which, I've
been there before.
Which is maybe why, wrapping it full circle here, that, earlier we were talking about the simplicity of games. Because the simpler a game is, obviously, the less there is for that to happen. Whether it's Destiny with its 2-page rulebook, or Love Letter with its little card.
Love Letter's great because the rounds are so fast too. I think that's worth noting.
It's quick pace.
But one last thing.
Final thought.
Final thought is, what was I going to say? Something about...
We'll go all around on final thoughts. We should start doing that on discussions.
You start on the final thoughts. I'll get back around to mine. All
right, so final thought in conclusion. Definitely teach games. Be prepared. Know the rules very well. And I think honestly, it's start with how do you win and frame that in terms of theme. And then from there, just introduce the naturally flowing concepts to getting to that point. So if it's Destiny, you're trying to defeat your opponent's characters. That's how you win. It's like, all right, naturally, well, how do you do damage? All right, do damage. What cards can you play that do more damage or that increase your damage? And then you just string it along. And the faster you get into the game itself, I think the better. Because sort of like in Mario, they just drop you in. Go.
My final thought would be, don't say you shouldn't do that, you should do this instead. But that there is a caveat to that, which is if somebody is showing a fundamental misunderstanding of the objective and how this is supposed to go, like if somebody's just, for instance in Mario, I mean, if they are just consistently like hitting a block that is producing nothing, that is already, the coins are gone, right? It's not doing anything and they don't quite realize it yet. Don't do it in the kind of like snapshot, the minute they're trying to do the thing way, stop them. But like let it happen and then say, all right, let's pause for a second. I just want to show you some different, methodologies that you can use to achieve kind of what I think you're trying to achieve. It's like, don't forget that you can run on R&D. That's always available. So there's always possibly agendas here. You can also run an HQ. I could always possibly have agendas on my hand. So you don't just have to always check the remote servers. There's always going to be agendas in all of these different places. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. If you want to check those servers, that's available to you. But doing it in a respectful way and a way that is not seemingly diminishing their decision making is the most important thing, because there's nothing worse than being told you're making the wrong decision, but I don't know why it's wrong. Right? So that's just really tough.
I think a really good analogy to that is in a video game when like there's an arrow, there are like a little like highlights, and it's like that's the direction I should go.
Yeah, I've been standing there too long.
But the game's not gonna like take me that direction.
Right.
It's like you can always go the other way, but like here's a little
hint.
There's always a one up to the left.
Remember, you can always run my deck.
Always.
So I would say for people who really get excited about this kind of thing, I think particularly teaching tabletop games, scaffold learning, that sort of the whole deal is just ripe for innovation. Like I think that is the one thing that this industry needs to really take it to the next level. And I think there's a lot of ways to do it, from a company making Glass Joe teaching decks, just straightforward, no frills. Here are the mechanics, taught by these things. I mean, and Destiny did a little bit. Lucas talked about it, where the common cards, the easier to find cards, he made very simple, and then the more legendary cards he made the more complex cards. So the thinking's kind of going in that direction, but I really think that it could be a whole different way of looking at things.
That's probably why we did land on those learning videos. We've been talking about this for months, right? Where it's like, well, what can we do? And it's like, we think we can do a decent job of solving this problem by having a very easy to understand learning, and we're learning as we go how best to do a learning series.
That's right.
It's pretty cool.
That's
and then the other
right.
thing, other two things is I always find it very helpful to keep the person I'm teaching apprised of the board state. What they should be seeing, what they used to say about old LeBron, he had court vision. What
good
that
forward always has court vision.
So give them that. Give them the tools to find it, but most importantly, demonstrate how you're seeing the board, how someone who knows the game sees the board, so that they can begin to have those skills. And lastly, as Stephen and you have both said, communicate. Some people want their hands held, some people want to figure it out, and the only way you're going to be able to find that out is to ask them throughout. And then, of course, I think Stephen's suggestion at the end of the game is fantastic.
There you have it.
Great.
All right, on to question time. We're going to answer one question here. Remember, you can use the hashtag AskCovenant. We'll answer your questions right here on the cast. And the question is from Sia Airsoft, and he wants to know, what do you think about losing Jackson Howard in the new Netrunner reboot? This is mainly for Steven. I'm loving the reboot so far, but losing Jackson Howard I think is a mistake. Personally, I think it puts a big damper on Corpse. Jackson Howard was a patch card for a game that was broken without it, and now not having a solution in its place I think was a bad idea. Hopefully something comes out soon. But what do you think?
I hear the ghost of Damon Stone.
Yeah, before I answer this question, there's also a pending question. We will get to it eventually. A question about the production methods and what we're using to do all of this. That is going to happen. I assure you that is going to happen. So we'll make good on that. But for this one in particular, the loss of Jackson Howard, it's fine. It's totally fine. I mean, there's no fundamental problem with Netrunner. Sometimes you have to play out of that stuff. Like those are the most epic games imaginable, is when you have 5 agendas in hand and you somehow are able to play out of it. Sometimes you'll lose. That's games, right? Like, and I love there's a difference between chess and poker, and and Netrunner has enough of the poker aspect to also have these sometimes you get bad hands. Like that just happens, and you don't have the option to just fold. That's what makes Netrunner so cool. I guess you could always just like say no, but you know, try to play out of it. And sometimes you do, and it's miraculous, and it feels amazing.
There are a few accomplishments that feel so accomplishing.
And sometimes, you know, you lose first turn, and it's like, yeah, that's going to happen about once a year.
Yeah.
So
Shuffle 'em up,
you're
go
saying
ahead.
it's worth it for the elation you get when you're able to play out of it.
It's worth it. I
Well,
guess
it's worth it for like Jackson, the consistency with which he let the corp get out of
bad situations.
not even bad, just everyday situations.
Yes,
It's not worth having him around.
Jackson was fine, but it was a handicap in a way. I mean, it allowed a corp deck to not have to worry about tempo, and I don't like that. Like the second that I draw my second agenda now, I need a scoring plan. Like I don't have the luxury of waiting around for 17 turns to find all my tech pieces because those agendas are going to get stolen. So it forces me to play a more fundamental game of Netrunner, which I think I really enjoy. And it's a bummer. Like I don't think we would be hurt by a selective mulligan in any of these games. If I drew into 5 agendas, maybe I can hold on to 1 and pitch 4.
Thrones from downtown.
Yeah, Thrones that would
Hallelujah.
immediately, would make
It's
a
way
difference.
better, yeah.
So it's not necessarily great that you can get agenda flooded, but I also don't think that Jackson Howard is a necessity to make the game as wholesome as it currently
A
is.
selective mulligan may be a good middle ground, though.
It'd be a great middle ground. It's just put in the tournament
You
rules and
can't-
go.
It's less likely for you to get flooded up front, but Jackson had a game-long out.
Yeah, it was in overcompensation for me.
All right, well, there you have it. Now we'll ask you a question. We'd love to get your comments below, and that is, what advice do you have for teaching games? Until next time, keep playing.